On the podcast today, we have one of the most terrifying yet inspiring set of stories that I have ever heard. This is the story of Tim Miller. Now, Tim Miller has been climbing since he was a child, and recently he won one of the most prestigious awards you can win for climbing and mountaineering. Imagine it like the Oscars for climbing. In this podcast, Tim talks us through some of the highlights of his careers. For example, summiting the previously unsummited mountain that he then named, which is just wild to me. But then he also talks us through some of the horrors, some of the nightmares. For example, getting buried alive in Pakistan. My name is Harrison Brown. And before you watch this episode of the Into Mind podcast, please do me a massive favor. Hit that subscribe button, hit that 5-star button. I'd really appreciate it. Enjoy.
Climbing when I was about 15, and that's from like Rosie, who came to our school, who like took us climbing outside and like taught us all the rope work for doing that. And at the same time also joined like a training, like a youth training team in Glasgow. We would do like competitions, and that was like really good for building up a base level of strength before. So when I went outside, you kind of already got like the sort of like physical ability. And then went to uni and just met other friends, and had a friend who had a car, and like just went off and had silly adventures and kind of learned along the way and all that kind of stuff. I got lots of good memories of my friend like climbing with a bike helmet on. My friend Finley, who's like a year above me in school, he had a car and I had like some climbing gear, and we would go out together and I would like drag him up stuff. We didn't have a guidebook, and we just like get totally soaked. We didn't have like waterproofs and all that kind of stuff. So
it was more just for the fun of it.
Yeah, just like proper adventure and like having a bit of a laugh and not getting loads done, but learning lots. Yeah.
I remember you in school. I remember there being the girls chatting about you because you had your top off somewhere and you were chiseled, man, because you just started climbing properly. And it actually like reminds me, I've started climbing just at the climbing gym, just like nothing big, just bouldering and auto belay. But you work muscles that you just never thought you had.
It's great because it doesn't feel like a workout. No. You're just like having a bit of fun, and it's very like bouldering's very sociable. You just go along and you spend like 5 minutes chatting, then like 5 minutes climbing, and you're just kind of like working through a problem that's like a bit of problem solving, and you end up having a workout, but you don't really realize. So it's good for that bouldering in particular.
It's less boring. Like I feel like when I go to do weights now at the gym, I get bored really easy. Yeah. Whereas if Andy and I go climb, we're there for like an hour and it's like that.
You can go for 2 hours or whatever, and it goes by pretty quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good for that.
And what kind of, because I'm on, you get like orange, purple, orange, blue. I'm on blues and greens at the moment.
Is this in TCA?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are you on?
I've done a whole bunch of the hardest ones, like the white ones, whatever.
You do the white?
But like that's just like the kind of scales indoors. But then like outdoors, there's like much harder ones and like a whole bunch of different grade systems and stuff. So like you get bouldering gets 2 different grades, like an American system and a French system.
What's the easiest?
It would be like, so the French one's called font, and that's like maybe font 1 or font 2 is like pretty easy, but that's kind of like really easy, like walking up a slab sort of thing. And then like and then up to like font 7C is like hardest I've like bouldered, which is the equivalent of like some of the hardest white ones indoors. But then there's like so much harder than that, like on some of the hardest boulders in the world, like up to like font 9A, which is I couldn't do a single move of that at all. That's like,
really?
Yeah, that's like much harder.
And do you think that when you're out bouldering in the wild, so to speak, that it's a lot harder than indoors, or do you think that it's quite like similar? The transition that I'm struggling with, Andy and I have been talking about this, and we're actually going to go to you hopefully for it.
Oh, cool.
But we want to get more into the bouldering, like outdoors and do more. The climbing gym's good, but it's not doing it for us anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So is it harder to transition outdoors from indoors?
Yeah, I think it is because like when you're indoors, you're on big purple blobs. It's easy to know where you're going, and it's like quite intuitive and like. Whereas when you go outdoors, you have to like you just got holes on the wall, and there's a bit more problem solving, and you have to kind of read the rock, which is a skill that takes quite a long time. And often like indoors, they can make fun problems that are still easy, so you can have an overhang but with big holes on it, but that doesn't really form outdoors naturally.
Yeah, it's not natural.
So the easier routes are normally like really slabby but still with quite small holes on it. I think bouldering in particular takes a bit of time to get into when you go outdoors. Whereas I think also for me, like what I really love about climbing is also like the exposure and the kind of element of risk and like the position in the mountains and stuff. And I really like going like trad climbing in the mountains where you're like placing your own gear and you're on like a big multi-pitch route. So you got like some space around you. And even then it can be easier technically. It can be like as easy as a purple indoors, but with all these other elements around it, like the kind of position and the
scale
the
of
mountains.
it. Yeah. So when you're outdoors on these boulders, they're like kind of like purples going up, but it's the sheer drop and the scale of it that is what you like.
Yeah. So climbing's got so many different categories of types of climbing. So you got bouldering, like just actual boulders outdoors, where it's only up to like maybe like 7 meters high or something. You kind of either climb off or you can jump off and stuff, and then you get sport climbing, which is equivalent of like indoor climbing where you have bolts, but that's then outdoors. So there's bolts in the rock, so it's super safe. You're just going to fall into a big metal bolt. And then you have trad climbing, which is where you're placing your own gear. And so instead of having a bolt, you're like putting a bit of metal into the rock, into cracks and stuff. And then that catches you if you fall. And then that's adding an element of risk because depends how well or how many opportunities there are to place bits of gear in the rock.
Because you'll have further to fall if you don't place it.
Yeah. If you don't place any, then you're not attached in. But if you like, there might only be so many cracks you can place gear into, and that kind of thing. And then you get multi-pitch climbing, and a pitch is basically a rope length. So if your rope's 60 meters and the route is 100 meters, you'd have to do it in 2 pitches.
Okay.
And so you would do a rope length of climbing, build an anchor, bring your mate up to that rope, to that point, and then do another one again. Yeah. And then you're kind of like, that's what you do in the mountains, a bit more adventurous, and you get more exposure around you. You're higher up, and then you have things like, in Yosemite, like El Cap, where some of those big cliffs will be like 30 pitches, so that's like 30 rope lengths, and that'll be like multi-day kind of stuff.
Yeah. And do you think it's the adrenaline aspect? Because like, did you graduate from the indoor stuff to the outdoor stuff? Is it because of that adrenaline aspect, do you think?
I don't think it's necessarily just adrenaline, and I don't think I'm motivated that much by adrenaline, because it's maybe like a stereotype, like seeking adrenaline and doing all that kind of stuff. But for me, it's also like where you are and the aesthetics of it, because like being like, if you just look at 2 pictures of an indoor climbing setting and being on a big wall somewhere, like sitting on a ledge, it's like so aesthetic. Like you just kind of, it looks like a place you just want to be. Like it looks intriguing, and that I always knew when I climbed indoors that I wanted to be in the mountains and doing outdoor sort of stuff, because it just feels more real. And I like the risk aspect because it's next thing to deal with, but not because it just adds adrenaline. I think also you have to be quite smart with how you kind of manage it. You can't, like, if you just go into it not thinking, you can get yourself in really bad situations. And so there's a lot of tactics to like how you place gear and what gear you take, and especially a big multi-day route, there's you're quite weight conscious, because you can carry a lot of stuff if you end up taking too much. And so yeah, and like all the rope work involved, there's a lot to know as well. So that all just I think it's really nice doing a sport where it's not purely the physical aspect. There's,
but you need to use your intelligence as well.
There's tactics and technical aspect and all that kind of stuff, and psychological as well.
I think I did learn that, especially when I first started climbing in just the indoor gym. I was kind of just go for it.
Yeah.
But the more you learn, the more you're like, no, there's certain moves you have to do at certain points to balance your body.
Yeah. There's a lot of technique to climbing, like a lot of it actually. And so you can be really strong and not do so well because your technique's bad. And then with the psychological aspect as well, like not always the best climber can do well if they aren't able to like switch their head off and like get into the zone of like, okay, there's no gear here, so either I don't do the route or I have to like sort of turn my brain off and just like climb it without thinking, and
that you're gonna fall.
Yeah, and try and get through this section till I get to the next bit of gear. Yeah. And that, because as soon as you have an element of risk, then sometimes your technique goes to pot and you like cling on too tight, and and you get all jittery and stuff. So being able to control that is like a really interesting part of it.
It's like the anxiety of knowing that it could potentially be an issue. Like if you fell, you could hurt yourself.
Yeah.
And do you find that you've ever done that? Have you ever been like halfway up a route and then you've looked down and thought, oh my God?
That happens most times I go climbing.
Yeah.
Like so often, especially with winter climbing, like we always joke, like you wake up at 4 a.m, you have to drive for like 2 hours to get to a cliff. You walk in into the mountains for about 2 hours through the snow, through a blizzard or something. You get to the cliff and then you go climbing all day and you just think, why have I done this to myself? And here I am halfway up, like the last bit of gear is way beneath my feet. If I fall off, I'm going to hurt myself. And I've chosen to be here. And you get through it and you get to the top and then you're delighted because you've overcome this challenge. And then as you're walking out, you're thinking, great, when can I do this again?
Yeah. So it's
and you just end up in this silly circle of like going around these like, and that's a big part of it, is kind of overcoming that mental challenge, and it's like really satisfying.
Especially the 4 a.m. bit. Like I remember when I first got into photography and video, I would get up at, I don't know, 3 a.m. to climb a Munro in Glencoe or something like that just to get the perfect shot. And halfway up the Munro, you're like, this is horrendous. Why have I done this?
Yeah.
But then when you're up
and then it becomes all worth it.
Yeah, and it becomes all worth it as you see that sun peeking over the Munro and you're just like, and do you do a lot of it? Is it sunrise stuff? Is it always in the morning?
No, it can vary a lot depending on the weather and stuff. And it depends on the type of climbing as well. So, like a big winter route or like alpine climbing and things that are a bit longer, you need a full day. So you just get up really early. So you've got the full daylight basically. In the Alps as well, like when the weather gets like quite hot in the afternoon, you get things like avalanches or rockfall or like ice melting and stuff. So you kind of want to be done before that happens. So sometimes you get up early and finish early. But then in summer, if you're just like out for a short kind of afternoon climb, if the weather's rubbish in the morning, you can just get up whenever and go and do that.
And have you ever experienced any kind of avalanches or rock falls or anything like that?
Yeah, like that stuff is relatively common. That you see it. I've been in about 2 avalanches, and then you see rockfall quite a lot, especially in the Alps, because it's the last few years have been really warm, and so when it warms up, especially in like July and August, like all the mountains are held together by permafrost. So they're kind of glued together with ice, and they don't normally get as hot as they have been. And then when they get super hot, all that ice melts and then rocks just start falling out. And so I've seen like some really big like car-sized boulders like trundling down hills and stuff. It's pretty impressive to watch, but also pretty scary.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, it's massive. Yeah.
That's so if you were on a route that you were climbing up and that came down, I'm guessing you're just...
Yeah, there's nothing you can do with that. But yeah, you can climb in areas that, like, because not all rock's the same. So certain like gullies might like have rockfall funnel down them. So whereas if you're on a ridge, there's generally less above you. Whereas if you're in a gully, things might come down, and areas will be known for having worse rock, that they are more likely to have more rockfall down them and stuff like that. And so
but does that make it more of a challenge? Like, does that make it more of... I feel like the more risky it is, you look at K2, I feel like the more risky it is, the more climbers are like, well, if I do it, nobody else has.
I think a little bit, but I think generally there's like risks that are worth taking, ones that aren't. And if you can climb a mountain or just even a route that's not going to have rockfall on it versus one that is almost definitely going to have rockfall on it, that would be a bit of a silly risk to just take on. But then there's obviously a lot of like climbs that do have a bigger reputation because they are known for more risk, but you have to like think pretty carefully about why you're taking it on and if it's worth it for you, because I don't think just taking on any risk for the sake of it is always
worth it.
Smart. Yeah.
And you said you've been caught in 2 avalanches on top of you.
One was in 2018 in Pakistan, and that was a really serious one because we were trying a new route on the peak, which had been climbed before, but this route would have been a new route, and we had been climbing for a couple of days, and then the weather got really bad, and we had to make a camp. And so we were camped on the shoulder of the mountain, and it snowed for about 2 or 3 days. And on the 3rd day, a small avalanche came down, but we had dug our tent into this platform. And so it completely buried our tent. And all 3 of us who were in the tent got completely crushed under there. It felt like plastic bags being compressed around your face. And I was at one end of the tent and the other two guys at the opposite end. And so like I just had like an air pocket about the size of like 30 centimeters in front of my face.
Oh my
And
God.
I just kind of ripped the tent and managed to squirm up to the surface. We were about like 1.5 meters under the snow. And I kind of got out to the top and looked to my side and expected to see them emerging from the snow as well. But they weren't. And so I went over to where they were roughly and dug down and eventually found both of them, but one of them had actually just died. And the other one, Bruce, I managed to get him out, and we were then both stood there, but we'd just been in our like leggings and our t-shirt and socks and stuff. And so then we were now like standing in this snowstorm, like wearing nothing basically. And so we then spent the next like 5 or 6 hours digging out the rest of the tent and all the kit, and you'd find like a glove and you'd put that on, and you'd find like another boot and stuff, and then you'd find the jacket. And then eventually we re-erected the tent a bit further down, somewhere a bit safer. But there's a big hole in the tent where I'd climbed out and the poles were snapped and stuff.
So you like ripped your way out the tent?
Yeah, I actually like bit it with my teeth and went like that to rip it, and then had to like squirm up, which it's like hard to know how long that all took, but it must have been, you don't have long, so maybe like 10 minutes or something, and then like another 5 or 10 minutes to dig down to the other guys.
Fuck, Tim, I'm so sorry. That's horrendous.
Yeah, that was like pretty full on, but that was like 5 or 6 years ago now, and I've told the story enough times I've like just becomes like a story now. And so yeah, we put our tent up again, and that evening we just spent the whole night like melting snow and then making it into hot water balls in our water balls, and then kind of eating food and stuff. And we kind of had our satellite text device, and we told our mate in base camp what had happened, and they kind of organised a rescue. And so the next day we woke up, we didn't actually need a rescue because me and Bruce were like fine by that point, but there was no way we could have gotten Christian down. And there would have been quite a big element of like potentially getting avalanched as we descended anyway. So the next day was rubbish weather, but we flattened off this platform where like a helicopter could come and land. And the following day after that, the weather was good and a helicopter could come in. And the first one landed, and we put Christian on, and Bruce got on that one as well. And that headed off, and then half an hour later came back, and I got on with all the rucksacks and stuff. Yes, that was like super full on.
Jesus Christ. Yeah. And was the snow like cement around you? Because I've heard it explained like that.
Yeah, it's because it comes down and it's all moving, and then it just kind of stops, and because it's all been sort of like shaken around, it then suddenly like sort of sets, and so it's much harder to dig through. It's not like digging through powder or anything. So when I was digging down to get to them, I just had like bare hands, and it was like really like all kind of compacted snow, so it did take quite a long time.
They're more icy than
it's
snowy.
Not more icy, but just like if you make snow into a snowball and it's kind of like compacted rather than just being light and fluffy.
Jesus Christ. Jeez, and that didn't put you off at all?
It definitely made me rethink what I was doing and all that kind of stuff. And the biggest effect is with like my mum and dad and my girlfriend and stuff. And because I've done 2 trips since then, like expedition, similar sort of trips. And they're obviously pretty worried while I'm away, and so I've got to do a lot to like
precautions. Yeah,
like make sure they know what's happening and have like a safety person in place so that if something happens, they're kind of being the person between, like kind of organising the rescue and make sure they're like reassured as much as possible. Yeah.
And what was the kind of aftermath of that? Was it just kind of you went back down to Pakistan and then flew back? Or?
Yeah, then we had like a week which was pretty nuts, where we had to like make some pretty hard phone calls to Christian's family. And then also we had all our stuff left at base camp, like passports and stuff, so we had to walk like 2 days back to base camp and get that stuff and bring it back. And then lots of phone calls with like the embassy, like because he was American, and so tracked the American embassy and then the British embassy, and then insurance companies and then news agencies started calling up.
Oh my god!
And it was pretty nuts.
It's the last thing you want is to speak to a news agency.
Yeah, and then there'd been another smaller avalanche in Scotland, which is like was pretty insignificant, really, just like because they vary a lot in size, and that one was just like kind of slid in it for about 50 meters and then stopped.
That's not too bad then, comparatively
Yeah,
to the last one.
like it was like pretty shallow, just maybe like 10 centimeters. You just slide, but had like even then, if you slide and you go over a cliff, then that's pretty bad.
Yeah, and which mountain?
That was on
Munro?
Ben Nevis.
Oh, I was on Nevis.
Yeah.
Is that your favourite?
There's a lot of good mountains in Scotland. Not sure I've got a favourite, but like it's a really good one. There's a lot of good rock climbing and winter climbing, and I've been climbing there for years, so it's got like a special place for sure.
Yeah.
But also like Benny up in Torridon's really good, and I love the Coolin as well in Skye.
Coolins are stunning.
Yeah.
We were there, Drew and I were there the other day. We said to you filming, just the actual, firstly the scale of it, but also just the shape of it is just beautiful. Like so beautiful. And even when you're at that bridge of the bottom of the Coolins, it's right beside the main road.
Pretty iconic, isn't it?
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. And did you camp? I know that we bumped into people that knew you in a bothy, but did you camp in a kind of the cliff face when you went up there, or how do you?
Yeah, I work on Skye a lot. That's actually, I mostly go there for work. I've done a lot of my own personal climbing and stuff there, but quite often I'll guide a traverse, so where you like go along the full ridge, and that'll be over 2 days. And so with clients, I'll like you'll have like maybe 9 hours or something doing the southern half, like you do about 5 or 6 Munros or something, and then you'll just bivvy out, so you won't have a tent or anything. And there's quite a few spots where it's like flattened off gravel, and you can have put your camp mat down, and then you'll be in your sleeping bag eating your dinner, watching the sunset and stuff. And there's a few little caves if the weather's bad, but it's pretty nice just being out in the open. So that's always really special doing that as well.
Do you think part of the attraction, and I'm speaking purely from personal experience here, when you're in like normal life, there's so much noise, whether that's like paying bills or taking your girlfriend out to dinner or like socializing with friends. Whereas when you're in the mountains, there's like, it's like a switch gets flicked off and there's like peace.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you think that's part of it?
Yeah, I think it's nice to have a single focus, which is like looking after yourself and getting to the top of something, or climbing, or just surviving. Like it makes life a lot simpler than answering emails and phone calls and
social media
and stuff like that. Yeah. I really like that. Just seems a lot kind of easier to manage, and probably a bit more natural. Like we're probably not built to sit on our phones all day, whereas we are built to just try and like manage the weather and get through the day, aren't we? That's probably what like people did like thousands of years ago. Yeah,
well, I suppose we're built, and Drew and I were discussing this beforehand, we're kind of built in a way that we need to keep moving forward and excelling and pushing the limits. And you see this with like, and I want to ask your opinion on this, gentleman, the likes of Nims doing the 14 peaks without, or well, he did a hybrid between oxygen, but he did that in what, 6-7 months?
Yeah, like 7 months or something, yeah.
But like, why? Do you know what I mean? It's amazing, but also you think, what an achievement, but why?
Yeah.
Why do you think it is that people want to keep?
I guess we just like challenges, don't we? That's what humans have always liked. Like, oh, can we get to the moon, or can we build this or that? I don't know. I think exploring has always been like a big thing. And well, I just really like exploring for myself, like seeing what's around the corner, just seeing what the world has, because you're only here for like a blink of an eye, and it's just nice to see like what there is to experience on Earth before we go. That's what I like about exploring. But obviously then there's the whole argument of like doing things to like keep developments going and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, essentially climbing is pretty pointless, isn't it? Like you're just going up a mountain, but it's good for yourself, but doesn't really help anyone. Yeah,
I was watching a video on YouTube, a documentary with you in it actually, and you were climbing, let me get this right, the Jugal Spire, and you named that, didn't you? Or did you name it, or was it the first time anyone's ever climbed it?
Yeah, no one had been up that before, and so we did the first ascent of that peak. Yeah, and so it didn't have a name; it just had like a number, like 6563. That's how high it was.
I need to pause this podcast really quickly to bring to you a quick word from our sponsor. Chisholm Hunter are the sponsors of the Into the Mind podcast, and without Chisholm Hunter, we would not be sitting here today. Chisholm Hunter specialise in luxury watches and luxury jewellery, and they're world renowned for their luxury diamond range. If you want to buy a luxury watch or diamond, head to chisholmhunter.co.uk. That's chisholmhunter.co.uk. And on that note, back to the podcast.
And we asked some locals if it had a name, and they didn't really know what it was called, because it kind of lies just in front of a much bigger mountain, so it doesn't really stick up in the skyline or anything. And so there's not really any reason why locals would have named it, because it doesn't kind of stick out. And so the area was called the Jugal Himal, those mountains around there. So we just called it Jugal Spire. And then the route which we climbed up it, we gave that a name as well. So we called that the Phantom Line.
That's quite good.
That's the name of the route, because we called it that because when we were looking through it with binoculars before we went up, we could kind of see bits of a line, but we weren't entirely sure if there was a possible route the whole way to the top, and it would kind of come and go depending what angle we looked at it from. So we called it Phantom Line.
So that's how you. So that's incredible. So you sat at the bottom of this mountain, looking at it with binoculars, and then you plotted your route based on what you saw.
Yeah. So even before we got there, there's like a lot of research that goes into it, and so Paul has like done an amazing job. That's the guy who I went with.
Yeah.
And so he's a lot older, and he spent his whole life like scanning Google Earth and researching like climbing journals that get released, which will have like most expedition trips that have been to different areas and what's been climbed. And you'll also have a good network of mates who know what expeditions have happened. And so with all that research, he worked out that this peak hadn't been climbed. And we also found out a team had been to the area the year before. And so we asked them if they had any photos, and he happened to have a photo with it in the background. And we could then see at that point there's like a worthwhile face that'd be good to climb. Because you don't know, like on Google Earth, it's a pretty grainy image, and it could be just like a big steep lump, but the rock quality could be rubbish, or there might not be an obvious line up it. But anyway, we saw there was a really good looking face, and we went, and then once we got there, the first week you're just acclimatizing and also doing a bit of a recce. So we climbed a much easier like snow slope just to get some height and spend time at altitude. And while we're doing that, we're looking through binoculars at the face, like trying to plot a potential line through it.
Yeah.
And on that route, it's like a big steep granite face, so like it's like vertical rock all over it, which would be like desperate to try and climb. But going across it diagonally is this like fault line where there was like ice on a ramp, and like there were points where the ice would disappear, and there was a few sections where we couldn't really tell if it would just be blank rock or if there'd be something there to climb up. And then we started up the route still not really knowing. And so it's like a huge it's a big difference between doing like a new route versus like climbing an already climbed route, because there's just so many unknowns. And so it wasn't the kind of blank section or the kind of the unknown section. We didn't get to that till about day 3 or something, and it turned out there was like a sort of big crack chimney feature that we could climb up. We had to leave rucksacks at the bottom. Then I would like squirm up this crack for like a couple of pitches, and we'd haul rucksacks up afterwards and stuff.
So that's two rocks that are sitting right beside each other.
Yeah, so chimney would be like, there's all these climbing bits of terminology, but like a chimney is like a really wide crack that you can kind of get half into. So like sort of 40 centimeters or wider.
That's my worst nightmare.
And you're like kind of putting an elbow and a shoulder and a knee in, and like sort of shuffling up, and it's a lot of squirming. So that was the crux of the route, was getting up this chimney, and then after that we're on to like more ice and ramps and stuff. But the whole climb from base camp to base camp was about 8 days. So about 2 days to get to the bottom of the route, then 5 days on the face, and then another day or two to get back to base camp again.
That's long.
Yeah, it's a long time.
How'd you pack for something like that? Because I'm guessing you need food, obviously. You need gas canisters. You need clothes. Yeah. How would you? Or do you, well, you don't shower for like 7 or 8 days, I'm guessing.
You don't shower for a month. There's no showers in base camp. You just like, base camp's not like what you imagine base camp is like at Everest or something. This is like a peak that no one's climbed before. So you just go and put your tent in the flattest bit of ground, and you're the only ones there, and you don't see anyone for a month. And so base camp. So for that trip, we went from Kathmandu and got a bus ride for like 7 hours or something to the end of the road. Then we walked for about 4 days to the edge of this glacier, basically. Found a flat bit of grass, put our tents there, and then we were there for about 3 weeks. The first week was acclimatizing and sussing out the route that I just mentioned, and then the kind of second 2 weeks you've got try and find like a weather window to do the route. And so for packing, you've got like a lot of heavy climbing kit. So like we took two 60-meter ropes, all the gear. So that's like all the metal work. So like cams, nuts, pitons and quick draws and stuff. You got helmets, harnesses, boots, but you're kind of, the hardest bit is actually, well, not the hardest bit, the heaviest bit is getting to the bottom of the route, because that's when all your stuff's in your bag. Then once you start climbing, the ropes are out and the gear's out and you've got it on your harness and so on. But you've got like all the overnight kit, so tent, sleeping bag, mat, stove, and then the food is always a big one, because you can, if you took the amount of food you would want to eat, you would just have such a heavy bag.
Yeah, so you need to like ration.
Yeah, it's like really cut down.
Yeah.
So you know those freeze-dried food packets?
Yeah, oh god.
So there's one company that I found actually that I actually look forward to eating. And another funny side effect with altitude is I also completely lose my appetite.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite common, and it's weird because you know you've done this massive day and you need to eat some food, but you just can't stomach it. It feels like when you're unwell and you just don't want to eat anything, which is quite a weird feeling. But so this company called Real Turret is amazing. So I definitely recommend them. So that's what you're having at dinner time, and that's like 700 calories or something. And in the morning you have like a similar sort of packet of like porridge or granola or something that's also like dry, and you just add water to it. Yeah. And then during the day you just have a few bars. And so
like protein bars, like Trek bars.
Protein bars and Mars bars, something with lots of calories in it.
Yeah. But, you can eat what you want, I'm guessing.
Say again?
You can eat what you want.
Yeah, you just eat what you want. You need to get as much as you can into you. And then, so I was kind of going off what Paul recommended, and he often goes off like 1 bar a day. So you just have like this porridge thing in the morning, freeze-dried meal at night time, and then 1 Mars bar. And that is like not enough compared to the amount of calories you're actually spending. Yeah. And so you inevitably lose a lot of weight. Even if you had like the second trip I did, I ate quite a bit more. I took 3 or 4 bars a day, but then maybe you're having like 1,000 calories in total, and you're probably burning like 4,000 or 5,000. And then with water, you try and drink a lot in the morning, and then don't tend to carry that much during the day because again it's heavy, and so you'll drink a lot in the morning and then drink a lot in the evening. And all your water is like melted snow and ice, so it's quite a long process. You have to like sit there with the stove, and the gas doesn't get as hot because you're at altitude, so the water boils a bit lower. And the gas takes ages because it's cold. So you have to keep your hands around it to keep it warm. And then you melt the snow, boil it, put it in your mug, and then you drink that, and then you do the same again. So the whole 8 days from when you leave base camp is actually just constant looking after yourself. And just keeping on moving. So we both have like separate roles, even in the tent, where like Paul's melting snow and I'm like trying to sort other things out, and you're kind of working together. But yeah, you like every trip I've done that's like that, I've come back about 6 kilos lighter or something.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing the amount of snow that you actually burn or like turn into water, like comparison to the amount of water it creates.
You've got to go through a lot of snow. It's just pretty time consuming.
Yeah. And what was the most dodgy bit of that?
Yeah, we had quite a not funny, but like interesting experience on day or the night of day 2, where we had, so again to camp, there's nowhere that's flat to camp on the face. You're just on like a vertical face. And so if you get to ice fields, like a snow field, you can chip a bit of a ledge into the ice, but it's really hard. So you can only make like a foot deep ledge. But Paul has this kind of homemade invention of a snow hammock, where it's like a bit of tarp that's in the shape of a hammock, which you attach to the side of the ice, and whatever you dig out of the ledge, you're filling into this hammock. And so if you dig a 1.5 foot deep ledge, you're filling this hammock up with snow, and that'll be 1.5 foot deep. So you end up with a 3 foot ledge, which you can then just about put a tent on. It still overhangs off the side, so this tent is like got the corners like just hanging in space, and the whole time you got your harness on, and you stayed tied in for the full 5 days, and you're clipped into an anchor. Right.
So if you fall off the cliff, you clipped in.
You're still clipped in, but also like, so I always got the short straw. So Paul was doing the cooking and I had to sleep on the outside. So like your bum and your feet and your head are all hanging off in space. You just like you have to like fill the gaps of the tent with your rucksack and your boots. But even then it's not comfortable. And
but did you and you never get scared of that? The fact that you're essentially sleeping on a cliff.
Yeah. Well. You are actually tied in, so it's one of those situations where it is scary, but it's relatively safe.
Yeah.
And also, I think after a while, you just become so knackered, you stop caring about small fears like that, and there's like bigger things to worry about, like actually being hit by some rockfall or something which would kill you. So the fact that you might fall off and just be a bit like, that's like not something worth worrying about. You don't have the energy for that. But anyway, on the second night, we so we had pitched our tent in on one of these ledges, and we were actually in this a bit of a mistake in a bit of a runnel. So any sort of snowfall kind of filtered down this runnel, and it snowed a bit during that evening while we were having dinner, and the snow started like sort of spin drifting onto the tent, which is kind of like, it's not an avalanche, but it's more just like large amounts of snow dumping on you, kind of get filtered down this little gully. And it was basically just like building up between our tent and the ice, and it was like pushing us off. So we had to get out of the tent and just stand on the ledge, and had to keep digging the tent out. And so we did that for maybe like 4 hours in the pitch black, and then we just realized it was a bit pointless. So we just like pulled the tent into the ice and just let the snow pile up on the ledge and just bury the tent. And so me and Paul just stood there with the head torches off while we were getting spin drifted on for several hours, just like waist deep in the snow. And you're just kind of thinking what a surreal situation this is, to be like halfway up this unclimbed mountain in the dark somewhere in the middle of Nepal, just getting pummeled by spin drift.
Yeah.
And then eventually it started to subside, and we got back into the tent, but it had been a bit damaged, and we just kind of sat in the tent. And so rather than, we couldn't really lie down because a lot of snow had got in, and it was all a bit crumpled, but we just kind of sat there and like shivered till the morning. And then the next day we just carried on. And so that was pretty grim, because you're then a bit cold and damp, and you've got no sleep at all. And so the next day we just started moving really slowly, and we found like the next ledge we found, we basically stopped there, and we just had another night there. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds. The thing about these kind of adventures are they sound amazing, but also shit at the same time.
Yeah, you have to really enjoy all the weird shit bits, which most people wouldn't really enjoy that. And it sounds, and I wouldn't really enjoy it on paper, but when you're there, you there is something pretty strange about it. That's kind of like, wow, this is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think the thing about shared experiences, especially when they're shit, you can talk about them, you can laugh about them, and that's kind of a beautiful thing. Like, let's say I went traveling for a while and I went to hostels. I stayed in hostels. Some of these hostels are shit, right? There's hostels where cockroaches are literally on you. But they were the funny bits because you're in it together.
That makes a story. Otherwise, it all goes too smoothly, and there's no story to it.
Yeah. I think that's a lot of the adventure side of thing is, firstly, you achieve something, which is amazing, but also you go through that shit with someone, and you build something with someone.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's like...
Yeah, they're essential for an adventure, because an adventure is not an adventure without like something going wrong and having to like make something up as you go along and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And what's your opinion on... Because there's the adventure side of things, like you've done, creating new routes or doing stuff that's never been done before, but then there's also the kind of tourism element. Base Camp Everest for an example. What are your thoughts on that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I've not really got into that world at all. And if I'm doing a personal climbing trip, like for myself, I would always try and look for something a bit further away from that. So like if I'm going to Nepal, it would be for like new routes or something that's been unclimbed or a bit esoteric or out the way or whatever. But also like through guiding in my work and stuff, I would do that kind of work if it came up, like working on Everest and stuff like that.
And are you fine with the tourism? Because again,
it's not something I would necessarily like.
Yeah.
But it's a whole new side which would be kind of interesting to see, but I don't imagine I would like it compared to like being by yourself and kind of enjoying it all. Because like in the mountains, people are a huge problem. Like it just influences your decision making, what other teams are doing. They can knock stuff down on top of your head. It just like it adds a lot of unknown and unpredictable risk to the day. Actually, like you get queues and stuff like that on Everest, and it's just and also it's not so like nice if like there's like human shit and stuff all over like ledges and stuff, and like a lot of rubbish left behind, and like bits of old tatty rope lying all over the mountain and stuff. Yeah. It's not super nice. But yeah.
I think, have you ever seen the movie Everest?
Yeah, I think I did see that quite a while ago, yeah.
Just from what you were saying about people influencing others, what a horrendous story about, you know, a teacher that shouldn't really have been allowed to go to the top by his guide. Because if they had left at that point, they probably would have lived. But because of that personal connection and friendship that they have, they make the wrong decision, and all of a sudden weather comes in and all hell breaks loose. Like, that is, you're right. I think the personal connection and also like other people can be an issue.
Yeah, because especially when you're guiding, clients have their own aspirations and stuff. And like my job is to try and manage that and try and achieve those aspirations while keeping it safe. And that's like a really delicate balance, because you get tied into wanting to try and help the person achieve what they want to achieve. But also you need to keep things safe, and it's like managing those two things basically. But if someone's really pushy, that really heavily influences your decision making, and it makes it a lot harder. Yeah.
Sometimes like the militant decisions of no, this is what we're doing are better than okay, fine, we'll do it. Because I mean, the gentleman that was the guide on that expedition, he knew what he was doing. He shouldn't have been doing. Like he knew the risks, but he did it anyway because of that personal connection. And I feel like that's just such a danger when it comes to climbing, because it is such a solitary sport. I mean, when you see people in the climbing gym, a lot of them have got their headphones on, they're looking at routes, they're kind of doing it themselves, kind of maybe how it should be.
But like generally, you, like when you're roped up, you're always in a team. And so I think, you pretty much always are climbing with other people.
But they're experienced.
But then also, yeah, so even like when you're with your mates and stuff, it's so important to have a partner who's like on the same wavelength as you.
Yeah.
And I think the more kind of adventurous the trip is, or like the kind of more serious it is, the more that matters. Having like a partner who's like, I think a few things. So like having the same sort of attitude to risk, and in terms of when you turn around, how safe you want to make it, because there's all sort of different ways of climbing and what rope techniques you use. Some are safer than others and so on. And also like having a similar sense of humor as well, and just getting on together. Because you're there for like a month or something with someone, and you've got to get on well, and you've got to just be on the same page with a lot of different things. Otherwise, tensions are going to arise. Because when your life's on the line, you're going to like have your own opinion. Yeah, you got to make sure that it's pretty similar to the person you're with. Yeah,
you need to have that ultimate trust.
Yeah,
I suppose that's where it gets tricky, is where people, instead of having the ultimate trust, they start paying. And I think that's kind of what Everest has got into. It's people with perhaps not as much experience that have paid a lot of money to be there. So the guide then feels obligated to get them to the top, even though they might not be capable of getting back down. And that's maybe where the issues arise, because it's people that don't necessarily climb a lot, but just want the achievement, and they have the money to go to Everest.
Yeah, that's certainly the stereotype, isn't it? But yeah, just that's the guy's job, is to try and work that out,
manage that,
and know where they are and how fit they are, and if they're going to get back down and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and they should be gauging that kind of thing. Have you ever thought of doing any of these big mountains out in Nepal, or like K2 or any of that kind of stuff?
Not as like a personal trip.
No,
because they're pretty expensive. Like the trips that I've done so far, if it's a new route and unclaimed peaks, you can get big grants for them, which cover a lot of the cost. And then also the permit is like pretty cheap, really, because no one's going to go there anyway. So it's like it's like 200 quid or something. Whereas all these big 8,000 meter peaks are like thousands of pounds for a permit. But so I wouldn't do them personally, but definitely, like I was saying, if someone offered me to work on them, I would do that.
Yeah, you do it.
Yeah,
you do it. And have you ever heard of? I was talking to John Bathgate regarding this, who's the Marine that got shot twice in the Amazon rainforest. Did a podcast with him, but there's a thing called, I believe it's called Climbers High, and essentially what happens is you'll go up to these peaks and you'll acclimatize to the altitude.
Yeah.
What happens when you acclimatize to the altitude is your body produces more red blood cells, and that carries oxygen around your body more. Yeah. But when you come back down, you feel amazing because you've still got all these red blood cells. Did you ever feel that? Because you were up at 6,000 meters. And then...
Yeah, I've been up to 7,000 meters before, but the thing with these kind of trips is, like I was saying, you're not eating enough. You're just doing these massive days, and you come back 6 kilos later, and so you just come back completely knackered. And yeah, you're more climatized, but you're just so like you lost a lot of muscle mass, and you just like you've been lying on a icy ledge for the last like week.
You just want a bed.
You need a bed. You need some proper food and stuff like that. But maybe if you did get altitude, like, and you don't need that much to have an effect. So maybe if you slept at like 4,000 meters in a hotel and got well fed, then you could see some sort of sports benefit if you went back to sea level again. But certainly not the trips I've done. I've always come back just feeling completely dead. Yeah. And it takes quite a long time to recover from getting your weight back up. And I've had like minor frostbite injuries and stuff like that. And that'll take.
You had frostbite?
Like just little bits on the end of my toes went black, but like just like bits of skin flake off, and it's fine after like a few months. It's not like super bad or anything. How did
that feel? Like getting. Well, I'm guessing you were freezing, but
yeah.
How did that feel when you got frostbite? I didn't even know you'd had that.
Yeah, but it's on like a big scale. It's not like super bad or anything, but like I just had like black tips on my toes. But it's kind of like they get a bit blistered and stuff, and then the skin flakes off, and it's kind of fine after maybe a month or two. Yeah, you just can't feel your feet all day, and you have to really keep on top of it. Like my hands are okay because you can kind of get a bit more feedback off your hands, and you can always put your gloves, like, you know, put your hands in a fist within the gloves and kind of like feel the rest of your fingers and try and warm them up. But you can't really do so much to warm your toes up when they're in boots and stuff. And in the evenings I would try and take my boots off and like assess how they're getting on and stuff. But then when you've got multiple days and they aren't drying out each time and stuff, then it's a bit hard to manage. But
I think it's just because they're damp, and then
your feet are just a bit damp, and then you're cold, and then it doesn't really dry out, and you're just climbing for like a week straight and stuff.
And the tips that went black.
Yeah, the skin just went a bit black and then peeled off, but it wasn't too bad really.
Yeah, you were fine. All the toes are remaining.
Yeah, they're all totally fine. They're all still there. Like, it's not a problem now. I guess it would just be a bit more susceptible to that kind of thing if it happens again, which is annoying.
Why?
Because I think it just damages the kind of blood flow to that area, and so you maybe don't get as much thereafter or something.
Yeah, because it's this is 5th year biology. It's vasorestriction, isn't it? So it contracts to keep all the blood in the center of your body, right?
Yeah.
So what's happened is your blood vessels have contracted, and then on reopening, they can't get back to that area.
Yeah.
Is that kind of how it?
I'm actually not totally sure, but something like that. All your body's like keeping all the blood in the core just to keep that warm. Yeah.
That sounds brutal though, and that's the only kind of frostbite you've had in terms of injury. You've never had any other big injuries, or you've been okay?
I did have like a ski injury years ago where I snapped my ACL.
Oh no!
But and that's quite a long one to recover from. Is like got surgery on it, and then use a graft from your hamstring, and then it's maybe like 6 to 9 months. Did a lot of physio for it and stuff, so it's actually pretty much fine now. But that is quite a long one to recover from. But that's the only injury I've had, and that was from skiing, so I never actually had a proper climbing injury.
That's good.
But I do know people who have lost like digits from frostbite. But like Paul, who I was climbing with actually on the last trip, he just like got the very end of his pinky finger in his left hand had to get taken off because we had a really cold summit day, and I think you just like you warm your hands up and they feel kind of cold and numb, but you're just not getting enough feedback, I guess, and you just let it get a bit too cold, and it went kind of white, and then a week later it went black, and then you had to get like just above the last knuckle taken off. But he's learning to get used to it again. Yeah.
And does that affect his climbing now?
Yeah, it will do probably. It'll affect rock climbing, and then winter climbing with an ice axe in your hand. Hopefully, it's like not enough to make a difference if you're still holding on to an ice axe. But yeah, I think he's just a bit annoyed because he's done like 30 years of expeditions, never had an injury like that. And then
Well, it might be age as well.
Yeah, I don't know if that plays a part potentially. Yeah.
Because I think age must, I mean, muscle deterioration, you've got things going on with age, so potentially your blood flow is affected by that. But that's a shame. But he was fine though, it was just the tip of his finger. And
yeah,
he's
and
okay.
it's left hand as well, so it's like if you're going to lose one, it's pretty good.
Yeah, exactly, you won't on the right hand. Yeah, and you didn't take oxygen up when you did the 5,000 metre.
Yeah, so like on the peaks we've done, so again, they're pretty technical. And so it's a really different style to doing stuff like Everest. Because on Everest, you're like, a lot of it's fairly easy climbing. You got big space for camps and they'll set fixed ropes down the mountains. So once those ropes are in place, you're pretty safe. You're just clipped in the whole time and you're jogging up and down the ropes and you can move kit around the mountain. So they'll have a big team of Sherpas and the climbers and stuff as well will move oxygen bottles around. But on our route, we did it in a style called alpine style, which is where you kind of start at the bottom, you've never done the mountain before, and you just go straight to the top and back down again. And so you don't have time to like shuttle things around the mountain, and it's too hard to do that anyway. You couldn't repeat the pitches, and so yeah, and it's 6,500 meters, so people wouldn't normally use oxygen for that sort of level anyway. But you got much less kit overall than what. I guess you have less kit overall than what you would have on an 8,000 meter peak, but you're carrying more on your rucksack because all your ropes and your rack are all on you rather than like pre-placed on the mountain.
Yeah, and you didn't. I remember when I was in Bolivia in the salt flats when I was quite young. Again, I was like probably just after that ski holiday I met you on, and I do remember being at quite high altitude. I can't remember what the altitude is. It was high altitude though, and the lack of breath. It's just something I've never experienced before.
Yeah, it's pretty unique actually. Like it's completely exhausting. And then you've got all these other factors like you're starving, hungry, and you're doing these big days of climbing, and you're carrying a big rucksack. But altitude is like, it's pretty amazing. Like it's kind of surprising how big effect it has. It's absolutely huge. And you'll be sitting in the tent like cooking, like panting for breath, sort of like you're doing something totally mundane and you'll be like
yeah,
and like everything you're doing is like that, and then you get a splitting headache as well. I get headaches quite a lot, and you don't really get much sleep because you got like a migraine.
And how long is the acclimatization time to those altitudes? Or I suppose you can't because you're going up, so it's like different every day.
So up to we tend to try and acclimatise to within 1,000 meters of the summit we're trying to climb, and so on like 6,500 meter peak we went up to about we actually went up to just below 6 on that trip, and so when you get to the end of the road we got the bus and that took us up to about 2,000 meters, and then we walked in for 4 days, and that whole time you're starting to acclimatise. So the walk in. We maybe went up by about 500 meters a day or something. And then we had base camp at about 4,000 meters. And then when we acclimatized, that was 8 days. And again, as you get a bit higher, you kind of want to make the increments a little bit smaller. So ideally for acclimatization, you're on like really easy terrain where there's no risks. And you can just go up by about 300 or 400 meters a day until you reach, the higher the better, but up to 1,000 meters below the summit level. And then once you're actually climbing, you're ideally acclimatized for most of the height of the route you're going to do. But then the top bit, you'll still continue acclimatizing as you go. But you're doing, because it's technical climbing, you're going a bit less far each day than what you would do on an easier, bigger peak. So you're, again, maybe climbing like 300 or 400 meters a day while you're on the face. Yeah, so it's quite a slow process. It's just about spending like a certain volume of time at altitude. And the acclimatization is like easy terrain, but you're just like suffering. It's just like headache. You're only maybe climbing for like 2 or 3 hours a day, and then the rest of the time is reading a book with a headache in a tent, basically.
Yeah.
So
And I saw that.
You'll be lying there for like 16, 17 hours just lying and reading with a headache, and then you do the same again the next day.
And do you find that relaxing? I realized when I was watching that documentary on YouTube, I did realize you had a ton of books with you. Do you? So you don't go on your phone at all? You just try.
Well, there's nothing to do on your phone. You got no signal, and So yeah, we take, like on that trip we took 3 books each, and like at base camp we had quite a bit of time where the weather was rubbish, and so again you'll have like a full day of just sitting reading. And I'm not a fast reader or anything, but I'll go through a book in a full day because you just spend like
the whole day reading.
Yeah, you got 17 hours reading. So just it's a good time for getting into books actually. And again, like what you're saying earlier, just forget about the rest of the world. Like life becomes so simple and easy. You're just eating, thinking about packing your bag, or like going climbing at some point and reading, and it's really relaxing actually.
Yeah. I think people in general, like humans, are quite. We shouldn't have as much stimulus as we're having. Like if you think of caveman hunter-gatherers, we're quite low stimulus things, like people.
Yeah.
And there was a stat the other day that was like, if a guy was to see a girl playing piano at a bar about 100 years ago, 200 years ago, it would release the same amount of dopamine a line of cocaine would release.
Wow.
But nowadays, because we've got TikTok, Instagram...
Yeah, you see that kind of stuff on social media all the time.
Yeah.
So we're not interested.
And people are like, their dopamine sort of switches or levers are being hijacked by these systems that release it synthetically, and it's not real. But I suppose what you're doing is you're stripping everything back and getting back to the...
Yeah, that's what's super nice about it is we're not designed for that amount of like emails and conversation. Well, not conversation, but it's like... demand for our time basically. And so having a single focus of getting up a mountain and surviving is like pretty refreshing.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, have you ever seen Sherpa, the documentary?
I've not seen that, no.
Oh man, I want to get your kind of opinion on it, but it's quite terrifying. It's about how the people going up Everest, or these really high peaks in Nepal, the mainstream ones, are treating the Sherpas and how much they're paid and how it's their only real way of generating income, despite the risks. Now, I can't remember the year, but people should watch this documentary if they're listening. But the Sherpas are going up the really dangerous bit, the ice fields of Everest, really dangerous, and it collapses, and there's a huge thing. I believe, don't quote me, but I believe it was like 16 of them died. And there's a video of an American guy at the bottom saying to his tour guide, we'll just make them take us up, treating him like a dog. It was horrendous. And you see the Sherpas walking up with all their shit, like all their rucksacks, all their stuff. My opinion is it's quite wrong, but I want to know what your take on it is.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's all definitely sounds wrong.
Yeah.
But that's the nice thing with all the climbing I do. You're not in that world. It's like a pretty different world, really. And like even most of the clients I spend time with aren't like that. Like when you go climbing in Scotland or in the Alps with people, they're like us. They're respectable and they do a lot of stuff in the mountains already, and they know how that sort of stuff works. I think the 8,000 meter peaks does attract like a different sort of client maybe, but not to say that they're all like that or anything. But yeah, that kind of thing's definitely not. It's like an ego. Good. Yeah, but I'm sure there's still lovely people that do that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah.
But it's pretty important to make sure you don't take that kind of stuff for granted, because you're obviously pulling a big shift to do all that stuff.
Oh, for sure. I think, but that's again, I think this is where money gets in the way of things. People have paid, upwards of £10,000, £20,000 to be there and to do, let's say, Everest is the mainstream one. So when somebody tells them no, all of a sudden you've got a conflict of interest there, and it causes that corrosive. Yeah,
I think it's important with clients to like work their way up, kind of peaks and stuff before they try the next big thing. So like having a pyramid of like experience. So they've done lots of the easy stuff, quite a bit of the medium stuff, and then a little bit of the hard stuff before they go on to like the next step up. Yeah. And that way they just kind of know how the mountains work, like, and also as a guide, you kind of get to form a relationship with them, and they know how you work. So when you say, "Oh, we're turning around here," they respect that. Yeah. And most of them already respect that already, because they've done a lot of, like, even if they come to me with like wanting to do some sort of climbing, they've probably done loads of hill walking themselves and lots of easier climbing, and they just need a hand with next kind of
Step.
tricky, the next step, the next tricky grade or whatever. And so they are climbers themselves and they understand that. Whereas if you do get a client who's like paid for a one-off thing to try something, they're not really outdoorsy people at all, then that's when you're going to get that. They don't know how the mountains work and they don't know like that you can't always get to the top or all that kind of stuff.
Is there any kind of like unspoken rules that you know of mountain climbing that perhaps people that haven't done it before don't know?
There's lots of little bits of etiquette and that kind of stuff, and I guess it is quite a lot to get your head around. They're all pretty small things, I guess, really. But some of the things I can think of are like with going winter climbing, there's like kind of ethics. And like in the UK, we've got a big thing about placing bolts or not placing bolts. And so when you put a bolt into the rock, it kind of defaces the rock. And so there's some areas where that's acceptable, where it's like a crag that's been specifically set aside for sport climbing, putting bolts in, and some crags where you have to put your own gear into because putting a bolt will completely change the route and it alters the rock. And then again, for winter climbing, no bolts are ever used in Scotland in the mountains. You get a few down low, but then for winter climbing as well, there's like a thing of it needs to look wintry, so you can't just get your axes and crampons and go and like climb something that's like just bare rock. It needs to be, if you do sometimes climb rocky routes, but they need to be like kind of covered in snow and have a wintry look to them. So that's called like winter conditions, and people can get a little bit worked up if you're climbing things if it's like too warm, and you're often climbing on frozen turf, and if the turf is all mushy, and you can pull turf out and it damages the turf as well and stuff like that.
Because it would damage it for the next people.
Yeah, you can pull it all out and then it's no longer there and then you can't climb it.
Yeah.
And some of the turf is like rare bits of heather and lichen and all that kind of stuff. But So things need to be cold and white for when you're going winter climbing in Scotland. So that's sometimes a thing that gets can be a bit hard for people to get their head around. And then I guess climbing in general does have sort of a ethos of like being like not too showy offy about things, and that can often be like something that rubs people up the wrong way if you get certain characters who are like quite big and bold about what they've done and stuff.
And Nims was one of them, wasn't he?
Yeah, he's quite bold about it.
Yeah. And people didn't, they hadn't seen his track record previous, because he hadn't maybe done those middle steps. So they were unsure about him starting.
Yeah, it's just not a very climbery sort of way of going about it. Because normally people are like quite quiet and understated and stuff.
That's what I like about it, though.
Yeah, that's what I really like about it. I think, and that's quite strong in Scotland as well, in particular. Like the kind of climbing community in Scotland is like not many people kind of like boast about what they've done at all.
Yeah.
And that's a nice thing. But Nims is a bit different, but he's obviously really good and super good at what he does. But it just kind of catches people off guard a bit when it's like, oh, that's not what you normally do.
Yeah, I know. But that's kind of, I think his body chemistry as well, after watching that documentary, is like fucking wild. Like he was on that treadmill and they were restricting the oxygen and measuring how his brain works under lack of oxygen. And where normal people would start essentially freaking out, he was fine. Yeah. Because essentially he's been born at that higher altitude. So he has more of those red blood cells.
Yeah, it probably does play an effect. Yeah, I think like normally if we come from sea level, we have to acclimatise each time. And he will still have to acclimatise, but maybe he's like just kind of set at a slightly higher altitude than what like our baseline would be sea level, but maybe his baseline is like 2,000 meters or something.
Yeah, so when he goes a bit further, he's okay.
Yeah, potentially.
That is interesting. I think one thing that he said, and I can't remember the words for it when I was watching his documentary, what is it when you start hallucinating because you've got lack of oxygen to the brain? They call it, is it COS or something like that?
Oh, I don't actually know what the name for it is, but yeah, you can... Yeah. You just basically go into complete exhaustion. And when we were coming off our peak, so I did another trip with Paul last November just there, and we were coming off and we were completely knackered of like starving, hungry, and the altitude and stuff as well, and we were just like stumbling all over the place and just moving super slowly. It completely affects everything you're doing. Yeah. Part of it's oxygen, but I think also just overall exhaustion as well.
Yeah. I see people like it's really terrifying. I mean, that they're, because of the lack of oxygen to the brain, they think they're really warm, and they'll start stripping off clothes.
Oh yeah, I think that can happen if you're like getting part of lack of oxygen, but also just like when you get hypothermic.
Yeah.
One of the symptoms is like sort of not realizing you're cold anymore and feeling like you're actually quite hot, and you end up like taking things off, and obviously that's not going to help.
Aye.
But again, I think just like if you are going to do these big trips, that's why it's helpful to have this pyramid, because you've already experienced like I think being in Scotland's a great training ground for it, because like the pathway that I took was going indoor climbing, then going outdoor climbing in summer, then winter climbing, then going to the Alps, and then you kind of go to expeditions. So when something like that happens on an expedition, you've already been out in blizzards in Scotland, and it's like, oh yeah, now I know how to look after myself.
You built yourself
because that's essentially like what it all comes down to, is not really the climbing or the fitness necessarily, but just your sort of self-management of knowing how many layers you need, when to change your layers, like how much you need to eat, and like listen to your body and that kind of thing, so you don't end up in a totally starved state or something.
Yeah. And what have you ever got to the top or near the top of a mountain with a client and you've had to be like, listen, no, we need to call it, we need to turn back?
Definitely there's been days when you have to call it and stuff. Not necessarily like, maybe there's been some when I've been like near the top, but often you kind of pitch it in a way the client can come round to the realization themselves, because you're painting a picture, or like they can see the situation that you're kind of going into. So it might be like, okay, the conversation might have would be like, we've been going for 5 hours, this is how far we've still got this mountain to go, we're not going to get there in time, but if we do this alternative route, we're going to be a bit quicker, and you can suggest alternatives and stuff like that. That's like a good way of like managing clients' expectations. That's quite a big part of it as well. And also like picking things that they are realistically going to achieve, because like then it feels like a success, even if it's not plan A. Whereas if you try plan A and don't do it, then it feels like a failure. So if you achieve it plan B, that feels like you've achieved something rather than failing on plan A.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Yeah. You've never had any kickback?
Not really. So again, like most clients I've had, I was saying, are all mountain people and understand how that works, and so they're always totally happy to go along with what I've said. There's been like maybe 1 or 2 times when people have been disappointed, but more not because of like my judgment, but because of their realization of it's obviously upsetting when you can't do what you want to do, when you spend a bit of money, or also maybe just like if you sort of hoped you were going to be able to achieve something which you can't, you kind of feel a bit annoyed at yourself. So I've had people a bit like that, but a lot of people understand how that all works, and it's like it's not as big a worry as you'd think. Most clients kind of get it. Yeah.
Well, I suppose it's dangerous, isn't it? And they kind of understand that you're just steering them away from danger.
Yeah,
so
that's what they're hiring you for. They know that they're getting you to keep them safe. Yeah.
So what would you say are the top 5 things to bring climbing with you on one of these expeditions?
For expeditions, like your kind of basic climbing kit, so harness, helmet, crampons, there's a lot more than 5. But then you got overnight stuff like tents and stoves. One big luxury though that is really good is having a book, and something that's also changed the game with that is having a Kindle. So I didn't used to have one until this year, but then because on previous trips, if I take 3 books and Paul takes 3 books, you go through them pretty quick.
And they're heavier as well.
Yeah, and they're pretty heavy. And I used to always, like in the Alps, I would always carry a big chunky book up to a hut and stuff, and then you got that to read. But having a Kindle is super small and light, and you got loads of books, so that's been a game changer for me.
And the battery life didn't...
Yeah, the battery on the Kindle lasts for ages. And I'll take a little solar panel with me on an expedition, so you can charge it up, and a little battery pack. But yeah, Kindle's a big one for bigger trips and so on. Yeah.
Do you read other climbers' expedition stories? Is that what you read?
I actually watch very little and read very little climbing content, because my friends are all climbers. I do it for a hobby and I do it for work, and I don't want to get back home and then read climbing books.
Yeah.
So I actually quite like reading other stuff, like completely other different stuff. And I have read a lot of climb books in my time, but trying not to, because otherwise my life becomes just one thing.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what happened to me as well. It was like a hobby, now it's a job. And then all my friends that I associate with also do it. It just becomes like your life.
Yeah. It's good to keep your life varied, I think. Like, do different things. I like going to music gigs and seeing friends and like, because Beth's not a climber, so she gets me doing a lot of other stuff, like we go cycling and go wild swimming and go for runs and stuff like that. So it's good. Yeah. It's
amazing what wild swimming does to your body. Like the shock response that it gives your body is so good for your brain.
Yeah, back in that cold spell we had a few weeks ago in January, there's a loch nearby and it completely froze over. It's like 3 inches of ice and you could walk on it without a single crack. And we took a sort of wood axe up and we chipped a hole and then like jumped to the ice and back out again. It's good fun.
You're nuts.
But,
You're nuts.
That was Beth's idea. That wasn't mine.
Yeah. There was an interesting study actually on that note, and I don't want anyone to quote me here again because I don't exactly know the numbers, so I'll give a general consensus. People that lived in Finland that go into things like this, that kind of drill a hole in the ice and jump in the water, come out and go to the sauna. Yeah. They were, I'm just going to say at decreased risk because I don't want to give the stats. They were at decreased risk of heart attack, stroke, like fits, going into cardiac arrests. Like everything came down, and the scientists believe that when you jump into the water, it releases cold water. It releases a shock protein that puts your body essentially in survival mode, right? Yeah. And apparently that is like so amazing for you. And then going from the cold water into the hot, that also is beneficial, which is really interesting. One thing I was going to ask you is, how do you deal with like weather on the mountains, right? Because if you book a trip to the Alps, you don't really know the weather in advance. How would you?
Yeah, I think for clients or for me or for anyone going climbing, it's super important to have a pretty flexible attitude. Yeah. Because you often book trips in like months in advance and you've got a week put aside, and it's really easy to be like, right, this trip I'm going to do the Matterhorn, for example, or something. You get really fixated on it. But you want to try and keep things open and say, I'm going to go climbing for a week in the Alps. And actually, even if you're flexible with location as well, which you can't really always do because you've got a hotel booked or something. But if you can be, then that opens up a lot more options and you're going to probably be a bit more successful, because it might be that the Matterhorn isn't in condition because, let's say, the weather's bad up high, but you can go and do lots of climbing down low in the valley. And so you get more out of the trip rather than trying to force something.
That can't happen.
That can't happen, yeah. And again, for clients, if they come to me really fixated on one thing, then I need to manage their expectations again and make sure that they know that there's a chance it might not happen, but there'll be a fun alternative. Might have to like drive for maybe a couple of hours to get to a different area, or do something of a different elevation or altitude, or like a different peak of a different nature, depending on what the problem is, like if it's rockfall on a particular route or if it's bad weather and stuff. So
have you ever thought of doing the Matterhorn?
Yeah, I've guided it a few times.
You've done it?
Yeah, I've guided it.
Really?
Yeah, that's like a really common one because it's like proper chocolate box, iconic mountain, isn't it? So the classic route is called the Hornley Ridge, and you go up and down the same way. But again, because it's so popular, there's a lot of people on it, and you go up and down the same way, which means that when you get to about 2/3 height, there's people starting to descend on top of you. And again, that's where the people thing comes in. So that's a little bit tricky, but it's proper an amazing mountain. And so yeah, I've worked on that quite a lot.
I can't believe you've been up that. I went up. I took the easy way up and went in a helicopter with a brand.
That's really cool.
Really cool watch brand, and they allowed me to like open the door and get some cool shots of the watches outside. But I was looking at this fucking ridge and I was like, there's not. It's so pointy. Yeah. That there's like. It's like you're constantly just going upwards. There's no like flat gradient.
Yeah.
You know?
It's proper climbing. Yeah. And you got like the north face down one side and the east face on the other side, and you're on this kind of arête between the two of them. So you've always got exposure on either side, whichever way you look.
Is the wind bad then, I'm guessing?
It can be just like the times when we did it, it wasn't too windy, and you just got to check the forecast. But again, that's the kind of thing you'd have to say to clients, like the wind might be too bad to go up, or it's going to be bad but manageable, or whatever. So all that expectation management type stuff.
Have you ever experienced any kind of like snow blindness in terms of not wearing sunglasses in your eyes?
I've not had that. A few friends have had it like momentarily for a little bit, but got to remember your sunglasses.
Yeah. And you bring your, I'm guessing you bring your sunglasses everywhere.
Probably carry a spare pair as well most of the time, like on a glacier and stuff, because you got all this reflection up, so you got it from above and from below. So you need some pretty good sunglasses. Yeah,
it's quite scary. You see people that have gone up Everest and are coming down and they just can't see.
Yeah,
like, the snow's
and you got the altitude and stuff, so they just go mental.
Yeah, legitimately. Like they can't see. They've got the altitude sickness. They've got lack of oxygen. They've got the pressure of getting down on time. Like the one thing you don't want to lose when you're up a mountain is your eyes.
You kind of need them.
Yeah. They just walk over the edge.
Yeah.
And in terms of the mental aspects of these things, because you've got wind that's a play, weather that's a play, snow blindness, lack of oxygen. How would you guide people in terms of managing their kind of anxieties about being up that high, looking down, fear of heights, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I think that starts when you first meet a client, and even when you first chat to them on the phone. So what they've done before, what's going to be appropriate for them, and also what they want to take on. It might be that they're looking for like a fun time in the mountains, in which case you find a peak that's going to be appropriate for them. Or it might be that they want a big challenge and they're ready to take on something that is going to scare them a little bit. So there's that. And then once you're with them, you're like doing a lot of reassuring throughout the day and like making sure they're staying in like a positive headspace and stuff. As soon as someone gets like exhausted and intimidated, then they just move a lot worse. So keeping them in a positive headspace just through like encouragement and making sure they know that you've got them, and keeping them informed as to where you're going and how it's all going to work and what's going on. But again, like with in terms of people finding that sort of stuff easier in general, you need that sort of pyramid. So it's familiarity, I think. And so if you haven't done much, maybe a bit of indoor climbing, and then you go and climb the Matterhorn, it's going to feel really full on. Whereas if they've done lots of time on mountains, building their way up, then like I was saying earlier, by the time they get to the next hardest thing, they've spent so much time doing everything beneath that it doesn't feel like a big step up, and so they feel quite comfortable in that environment. And that's important as well.
Yeah. I'm definitely going to message you after this with, I'd love to film something like that up a mountain, sunrise up a mountain.
Yeah.
We can do something like that, because Andy is really keen for it, and I was like, I know the guy.
Yeah, great.
That'd be awesome.
A lot of fun, yeah.
Yeah. And have you ever done any kind of video stuff before up in the mountains?
My friend is a photographer. He does climbing photography. So I've done quite a lot of like sort of photo shoot type stuff with him, which is like modeling for a brand or whatever.
So he climbs as well. He brings his camera.
Hamish is a good climber as well, and
right.
So like you'll just do a day basically climbing with him, but it'll be a bit more stop-starty, and he will like tell you to stop for a second there and pose there while he gets a few photos. But he's a really good climber, so he can move around you while you're just out for a normal day and still get a lot of stuff without it really holding the day up.
Yeah,
which is quite important.
I will not be like that.
Yeah. And then on expeditions I've been on, a bit of a deal we've had with brands to get some kit and funding is we've like taken lots of footage from the trip, and then it's been edited by a guy who makes it into a little film. But that's all just like handheld footage that we've taken on like small cameras. Yeah, so done bits of that as well.
If any brands are listening, you need to sponsor this guy. And what are the goals for you in the future in terms of like what mountain peaks do you want to climb? What expeditions do you want to do?
Yeah, I'm at the moment trying to like do a little bit less of the kind of in terms of my personal climbing, less of the kind of really scary expedition type stuff, because that's like sort of a numbers game. There's a lot of things out of your control, and that type of climbing where you're doing new routes on big Himalayan peaks, there's just so many risks that you can't control. So you got like hypothermia, frostbite, avalanches, seracs, which are like hanging glaciers can fall on you, rockfall. You just 5 days up a mountain that you can't really retreat from, all this sort of stuff. So it's pretty dangerous. But I'd like to get more into something called big wall climbing, where you're on like a rock face. So stuff like in Yosemite, where
It's beautiful there.
it looks really cool, yeah.
Stunning.
And so then you can actually ab off, because it's a bit easier to ab off that kind of stuff. Like in Nepal, the last trip, we're on a 2,000 meter face. And when you abseil off, you leave gear behind, and we don't have enough gear that you could reach the bottom of a 2,000 meter face. Or you're not going to get avalanches and seracs because you're on like a rock face rather than a big icy mountain. And it's a bit lower altitude as well, and all this kind of stuff. So I like to get more into that. And so this summer I'm going to go to Greenland for about 5 weeks.
Who are you going with? Have you got?
We've got a team of 4 of us. So there's myself, a friend called Callum Johnson who lives in Inverness, Simon Smith who lives in Glasgow, and a girl called Mishka who's Slovakian. And there's a huge sea cliff. It's about 1,000 meters, which we'll have to kayak into, and then try and do this big multi-pitch rock climb. Have to sleep on the wall and stuff.
That's class.
So that'd be really cool, yeah. And that just feels quite a bit more relaxing than the previous couple of trips, where it's like a more controlled environment. It'll still be really adventurous and really cool, and we're going to try and do a new route as well. So I'm trying to get into more of that, because I've kind of done a lot of what I wanted to do on the kind of big Himalayan peaks in terms of my own personal climbing, but I'd like to keep doing work there. So this October I'm going to do like a guided Himalayan trip with some clients, where we have a month, and the first kind of 2 weeks we'll acclimatise by doing a big trek, and go over some passes, spend time in like tea rooms and stuff. And we'll have like maybe 5 clients for the trek, and then they'll all, or most of them will head back home at the end of the 2 weeks, and one guy is going to stay out, and we'll try and climb a 6,500 meter peak, and I'll guide him up it. And so I'll still keep getting my sort of Himalayan fix through work. And then another fun trip I've got planned is an Iceland trip. We'll go for a week, and then my girlfriend does a lot of sailing, and she's got a friend who has a boat in Iceland who they run like sort of sailing tours, and I'm going to go with a bunch of clients and try and do some ski touring, like do day tours and come back to the boat, and then move around to the next area, then do a day of skiing, get back to the boat. And so using boat as a base camp, and having dinner on there and sleeping on there and stuff. So that's my trips for this year. That's the plans.
You're going to love Iceland.
Yeah.
Iceland. I've never been to Greenland, but Iceland, man. I actually went with my brother quite recently to see a volcano.
Yeah, wow.
Mate, beautiful.
Yeah.
Especially for a photographer. Like, that's a dream for me. You need to get a camera.
Yeah. Oh, we actually just bought a good, or kind of good camera, I think. It's like kind of mid-range one, but Beth's got it, and she works away quite a lot on boats and stuff, so she's in Antarctica just now.
Wow.
So yeah, she works on like sort of tall ships that sail around the world, and it'll take clients on a voyage, and then they'll she kind of picks where they land and take guests ashore and go for a walk with them, and they'll see penguins, and she'll do lectures about the plants, animals and stuff. And
she doesn't know a guy called Alex. His Instagram name is like ALX Visuals, and he's a photographer on one of those boats, and he's in Antarctica right now.
Maybe she would.
Alex Williams.
I don't know. I wouldn't know him, but maybe she would.
Yeah.
Okay.
I went to Iceland with him.
Oh, nice.
One of the first. I remember telling you about that. One of the first trips I ever went on to like an expedition for photography and paid work was Iceland, and I went with 2 random guys that I'd never met.
Yeah.
Alex was one of them.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Really cool guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should ask her.
Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah.
He's a really cool guy. He said he's talking to me about he used to go to America, and he used to hitchhike around America. And there was one time he was with a pal, and he pulled this van over at the side of the road, went onto the van, and the driver and his girlfriend were smoking meth while driving the van.
Oh my goodness.
And you can't, as a hitchhiker, you can't say anything. Like, you need to be very, you can't be rude, because you might piss this guy off and you don't know who he is or what he does.
What's going to happen?
So they get to like a fuel stop. The guy and the girl that are driving go into the toilet together. And he's like God knows what they were doing, but they were doing something explicit. And then he and his friend were just like, no, we can't do this. They just dipped, like, and camped on the side of the road. They were just like, no, we're getting out of here.
Getting out of here, yeah.
Yeah. Wild. Have you ever done any hitchhiking or anything like that?
Yeah, when I was younger, I used to do quite a bit. Yeah, I didn't have a car for the first couple of years I was climbing and stuff, and so I used to like get the train, but then it only goes so far. You have to like hitchhike the rest of the way and stuff.
In Scotland, you were fine getting picked up in Scotland by...
Yeah, I mean, that was maybe like 10 years ago or something.
Yeah.
And I think it's all got a bit harder since COVID because people don't want to share cars with each other.
Yeah,
But yeah, and I mean, the areas you're doing it are kind of like in mountainous areas. So it couldn't just go into Great Western Road and get a lift. But but like from the Ben Nevis car park, like I'd often also get a lift more often going from climbing back down again, because you'd like find other climbers as you're walking down and like just ask them if, are you going to go past Glasgow and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to do quite a lot, and you end up meeting all sorts of funny folk, like lorry drivers and hearing different stories and stuff like that. It's quite good. It's more adventure, isn't it?
And that's how you met your man, wasn't it?
So Paul, who I did a lot of climbing with the last couple of years, that was through hitchhiking, where I'd been on...
That's wild.
I've been climbing on Ben Nevis by myself and walking down at the end of the day, and he was in front of me with his mate, and just didn't know who they were at the time, but just asked them if they're going past Glasgow, and they were. And then the whole lift down, he had to get all the way down to southern England somewhere. So he was like whizzing down pretty quick, like overtaking all these cars. It's a pretty fun ride. And he was telling me about all these stories of when he'd been hitchhiking when he was younger, and like all his climbing stories and stuff. And then once he told me his name, I'd heard of who Paul was. And at the time, he was like my kind of climbing hero. So it was really cool to meet him. And then... Did
you tell him, or were you...
No, well, I told him I knew who he was.
Yeah.
And then... It wasn't until I didn't see him for like 5 years or something, and then we ended up on a similar kind of exchange trip where like 6 Polish guys came to Scotland and we took them Scottish winter climbing, and then we went to Poland and they took us Polish winter climbing. So it's quite cool because can't read Polish guidebooks and don't know what the conditions are doing and all that kind of stuff. So pretty nice way of doing it. And then after that, me and Paul started planning a trip together. But that was like 2020 when COVID was pretty annoying. So we couldn't do a trip then. We delayed it a year, but COVID was still like causing problems with travel and stuff. We'd have had to have like isolated for 2 weeks in a hotel and all that kind of thing. So we cancelled that, and then eventually managed to make our first trip work in spring 2022 when we climbed this Jugal Spire peak, and then did another trip in 2023 in the autumn. So yeah, it's been pretty cool to be able to go climbing with your climbing heroes and kind of come full circle. That's a really nice thing with climbing.
I also feel like, though, when you're doing these low stimulus activities, for example, photography and videography is one of them, because you're not on your phone, you're just taking a photo of a landscape. And a lot of the time you can't use your phone because you can't have light pollution. All you really have to do is talk to each other. So like I went round Iceland for like 7 days with Alex and Matty.
Yeah.
I know that they're like best pals. I've not seen them in like a year, but because you're so close with each other, you're sharing a van with each other, you aren't really looking at your phone, there's not much stimulus going on, you have really in-depth conversations.
Yeah, and I think when you have unlimited time as well.
Yeah.
So like on a trip like that or on an expedition, you're there for a month, and so you can let conversations come and go, and it's really natural. It's not like quick coffee break, tell you what I've been up to the last 6 weeks and go again. So it is nice. Yeah, definitely different level of connection, isn't it? Yeah,
and we went to, it kind of reminds me, we hiked to the most remote pub in Scotland, Old Forge. It's like I think it's 52k, don't quote me, it's something like that.
Yeah, Neudart.
Yeah. And it was a beautiful hike, but no signal on your phone. And I went with my pal Andy. The conversations you have they're just like a different layer. I feel like you have layers of conversations. You have the surface level shite. How was your day? Yeah. You have then the secondary, but it's when you get a little bit lower, that's when the real connection starts coming through. And that's what these trips activate within people, because they don't have, I'm going to take this photo for Instagram and hopefully I get some likes for it. It's not that. It's more just getting to know each other. Yeah.
We also did a bit of work, me and a few friends a couple of years ago, working on like Christmas tree harvesting. It's like kind of a classic job that outdoor people do because it fills in like a gap in the calendar where there's often not much work in autumn because it's a bit too wet and cold, but you'd end up just like stacking Christmas trees, and you just work for like a month with no days off. And it's always pretty brutal work. You just do long hours dragging Christmas trees about, but it's always quite good fun because you're in this sort of knackered state, just dragging trees around. You just end up having good conversations and taking the piss out of each other, and it's like a bit of a laugh.
Yeah, it's a good community.
Yeah.
I think that's so much of what we're missing nowadays.
Yeah, you're bonded by a bit of hardship.
Yeah, and people are so like adverse to hardship. Hardship can be a good thing. People create hardship just because they have nothing else to do to experience that.
Yeah, today's world is like so geared around making life easier that people who have the free time and the money to do these things go looking for hardship, which is kind of it's like the opposite of what we were like years and years ago, where we would try and avoid that because we had too much of it, and now we kind of go looking for it as a stimulus, don't we? Yeah,
because it's what we're lacking, I think, nowadays.
Yeah.
Like you see, there's so many. It's really terrifying, actually. You see so many people that literally just don't leave their place. Like they just don't leave. They're just like, oh no, I'm quite happy just going into town and coming back and not really seeing much. And it's a shame because their dopamine receptors are being hijacked by a device.
Yeah, just overcomes them.
Yeah. We have a closing tradition on the podcast. What is the most valuable lesson that you've ever learned in climbing?
I think climbing teaches a lot of stuff, actually. Maybe the biggest one is like sort of mind over matter and being able to overcome sort of psychological situations that are a bit scary by like turning your mind off and kind of staying calm. So like if like scary things happen, you can react to them pretty calmly because you've seen not necessarily stuff that's worse, but just things that are like quite dangerous. You've been in a situation where you're standing on a ledge and you've got no gear in it. You've had to overcome that, and so when something happens in real life, it doesn't seem like that big a problem. That's really nice.
So it's the psychological aspect of it.
Yeah, you can deal with kind of intense situations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you find that it's easier to deal with intense situations in normal life because of that?
Well, I guess a certain level of intense situations. So like things with an element of risk, but I would find intense situations like public speaking or something still pretty scary.
Yeah, or cameras.
Or just being on a podcast.
Yeah, like today. No, you've done well.
Yeah, cool. Thanks a lot. Yeah, it's been good.
No, you've done well. Yeah. Thank you very much, man. And how can people find you?
Yeah, so I've got an Instagram account and a website and a Facebook page, which is Miller Mountain Guides. And I do guiding in Scotland and the Alps, and I often run trips. So like this year, saying Greenland, Iceland, and Nepal. Yeah. So if you're interested in them, give me a shout.
Yeah.
And just send me a message on Instagram or WhatsApp or something.
Yeah. I'll be hitting you up. Me and
Sounds
Andy will be hitting you up.
Yeah, great. Yeah, that'd be fun.
Good. Well, thank you very much, man. I appreciate it.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. It's been great.